there's something on my mind that I've been noticing, and this I think that applies to astrology, as well as if you're, I don't know, looking at different spiritual teachers and stuff like that. Um, and I think it goes with the axis between Sagittarius and Gemini, and that we're going to be having eclipses in those signs. Um, I think I can kind of tie in this sort of observation or this thought with the Gemini Sagittarius eclipse season, and sort of like the meaning of Mercury in Gemini. And when we start to get Venus and the Sun in Gemini as well, it kind of might go with those themes. One of the things that has been coming up, anyways, is the contrast or the polarity between objectivity and subjectivity. Now, if you think about it, a fire a fire sign is like a singular kind of quality. It's like this kind. It's more about like the one singular truth. It's more about like if you think about the sun, for example, as being the ruler of Leo. The sun is like the bright solar. It's like the king, the hero, the singular kind of individual quality. Um, Jupiter is like the ruler of Sagittarius, and it was like the Zeus, right? Zeus was the main patriarch of the pantheon of Greek gods, and so there's a sort of like there's a masculine singular quality, which is also it's interesting because the system of exaltations, there's an interesting thing that happens. There's a With the exception of Aries, because the sun is exalted in Aries, but most of the fire signs and the air signs, they don't have exaltation lords, or they don't have planets which are in fall in those signs. If you look at Sagittarius, it's just Jupiter, right? If you look at Leo, it's just the sun. If you look at Gemini, it's just Mercury. Whereas if you look at Pisces, for example, you've got Venus exaltation. You look at Scorpio, you've got the fall of the moon. You look at Cancer, you've got Jupiter exaltation. So you've got more of a kind of a multiplicity with the feminine signs and more of a singularity with the masculine signs, right? Um, and so we're going through a period of time right now where the South Node is in Sagittarius and the North Node is in Gemini. And to put it simply, the North Node represents a kind of an increase, and the South Node represents a kind of a decrease. So what we're kind of looking at is a kind of like an increase around the Gemini quality of multiplicity. Um, it's kind of funny because I was just saying that that Gemini is still a masculine sign, so it's not, but it's a little bit more feminine than a fire sign is. Like fire is sort of like the extreme singularity. Gemini is maybe a little bit more singular, but it's the air has this quality of, oh man, well, I'm kind of tying myself up here. I'm gonna just keep going anyways. There's this quality of, with Jupiter and Sagittarius being the sort of driving towards a singular truth. If you think of the image of a the centaur who's also an archer, um, pulling the arrow back, and you're trying to hit the bullseye. You're trying to go for this sort of singular, also it's what I would say objective truth, because you're talking about something which is like the kind of that fire quality burning away the dross and trying to get at this sort of singular spiritual kind of truth, which is more transcendental in a way. There was something about the element of fire where fire was always trying to like a flame goes upwards, right? Because fire is always trying to like go up to the heavens, right? So, and that if you think about the way the elements are, we're standing on the earth, water flows over the earth, the air is kind of above the water in the sky, and then the fire is associated with the heavens, right? Like the sun and the stars, and it's like this highest thing. So there's something more transcendental about fire, which is like rising above the basically the subjectivity, right? There's some sort of like universal, singular, objective truth, and with the sun representing this kind of wholeness, right? Like which could be like the as an image for God, even, right? Like the sun, which has its joy in the ninth house, having this solar association with God and the illumination of this one kind of truth, right? In contrast to that, Mercury and Gemini is the symbol of Gemini. Rather than being the archer Sagittarius, it's the sign of the twins. So in Gemini, there's more of a two-sidedness. There's like the two truths. Mercury also has this quality where in Hellenistic astrology anyways, Mercury doesn't necessarily play for one team. This is because it's whether you're born during the day or the night, Mercury has this quality where it kind of adapts. Like Mercury can be on either side depending whether it's like a day chart or a night chart. It's kind of like cooperates. It's not doesn't really favor one side so much over the other. It's kind of more cooperative. Um, so that, I mean, this is some astrology stuff that I'm talking about right now. But to bring it back to this thing about objectivity and subjectivity, what I'm noticing as just as a general thing from it's like a challenge of being an astrologer basically is that it's our job to sort of talk about some kind of like it's like a universal thing like an archetypal pattern that's playing out, right? If you think about, let's say, Plato and the forms, right? That there's what we experience in our manifest reality. There's all sorts of manifested forms like human beings, you know, pets, like dogs and cats or horses or you name it, right? And each of these follows a kind of a pattern. Like there's this idea that there's a there's a kind of like a blueprint for each thing, and that the blue type is like the blueprint is like an archetype. What is if you look at the word archetype, it's type is kind of like typing out like on a keyboard, right? Where you've got like you press the if you're writing on an old typewriter, you press each letter and the same symbol makes an imprint many different times. You press the same key over and over again, you get the same symbol imprinting, and so there's this kind of idea that there's like a certain it's like there's almost like these kind of blueprints, like a human being blueprint, and then it gets imprinted, or like a dog or a cat or a bird or a tree or something like this, and then you get in some way you get variation happening because no person is exactly the same, no animal is exactly the same, no tree looks, trees may have a similar quality where the leaves, you can identify a tree because the leaves are a similar shape, but then when you actually look at the specifics of this tree and that tree, the branches might be coming out in different places. One might be a bit bigger, one might be a bit smaller. So there's this thing about the variation versus this kind of unifying pattern that you can use to like identify that this is this kind of tree, this is this kind of dog, this is this kind of whatever, and then a level of variation in between that, right? And if you look at, okay, Gemini being the sign of the twins, that, the twins, okay, like it's the kind of that thing about twins. Are the twins identical twins, or is there some slight degree of variation that you can kind of tell them apart? This is good. Also, you could lead into an interesting question. Oh, one of the things that astrology skeptics often bring up is that if a natal chart works so well, then how do you handle the problem of twins, right? Because if you've got two people born at the exact same time, then are they going to have the exact same lives? Obviously not, right? They're going to probably have quite different lives. Twins aren't exactly the same people, but there's got to be some kind of pattern, which would be the objective pattern playing out through the subjectivity of two people born at the same time, right? And so whenever we're doing astrology, I think there's a challenge here where when you're looking at how this kind of objective, or this sort of the idea of a perfect form playing out through all these different vast multiplicities, with different people in different situations, and kind of trying to understand the interplay of those factors without getting too caught up in it. Because, well, I mean, this is one of the things that I'm noticing, is that if you were to, like, let's take like spiritual teachers, right? I don't know how many what kind of following that I have on here, how many of you astrology fans are into spirituality, or if there's any certain teachers that you look up to or something like that. But I get the impression that there is some kind of a universal truth, right? Like there's some kind, like you could listen to this person or that person, or you could listen to this faith or this tradition, and in some way they might sound like that each person is saying something kind of conflicting, or you could also see the common thread between each thing, right? And that if you've got an eye for it, you could look at certain things, like one person may say that, like, if you take, let's say, Buddhism and Christianity, for example, that these are two religions or faiths that are very different, because one of them worships it's a monotheistic system where you're worshiping one god that kind of lords over everything, and you've got Jesus as being, the reincarnation of that god in human form. Whereas with Buddhism, they don't have, it's a non-theistic religion. They don't believe in a god at all, and that they actually say the whole idea of God being separate from man is a kind of an impediment to realizing the what you call shunyata, or the emptiness, the kind of the space of the interconnectedness of all things, or whatever. And so at some level it could seem like these two things are very different, but there's a question of, like, are we, let's go to Gemini, where you've got the twins, right? Gemini is, you've got these two things, and we could you could say that these two twins may look similar in some ways, but they're completely different people. I think it's kind of interesting too that Gemini is an air sign, which might suggest that air all has to do with intellect and conceptuality and stuff like this. So the more that we're in our ideas and the more that we're in our mind, it may be easier to sort of break things apart and say, categorize things, right? To say that this is like this is like this, and organize things by what makes them different, rather than understand that there's some kind of underlying unity where even traditions which seem completely separate may actually be talking about the same thing, but we might have to get over the conceptuality of it to see that underlying truth, right? So this is one thing, though, that I think when the North Node is in Gemini and the South Node is in Sagittarius, it may be a bit harder to see the underlying uniting truth of things, and what you end up getting is more of this kind of like polyphony, right, of many different voices, many different truths, and there is something that comes to mind, which is the guy Ken Wilber, who came up with the system of integral psychology, integral theory, kind of. I mean, he didn't do it all himself. I won't get into those details right now, but he in a talk he was talking about this idea that of everybody's right, and that you may have a variety of people from a variety of different backgrounds, different levels of development, and all this kind of stuff. But even if it may seem like everybody is, or if different people have different perspectives, it may seem radically different, and even like in contradiction to each other, that each one of those perspectives has something valid to offer, but it may only be a partial truth, right? And there's also this kind of parable about like a bunch of people in the dark feeling around at an elephant, right? And one guy gets the tail and thinks it's a snake, and one guy is like grabs the grabs the leg and thinks it's a tree trunk or whatever. One person like it's that kind of thing with, I think that's what you get with Gemini, right? Is that it's got this like, if you take the one unifying thing and as if it was like a mirror or something, and you were to like shatter it, or it's like a mirror ball, or where you've instead got all these little pieces which are each reflecting one part of it. And the deeper truth is that the more you zoom in, it's like there's an image from I think Zen, where it was like the dewdrops in the morning, where each individual dewdrop, if you look at it closely enough, because it's round, it sort of reflects the whole panoramic view of everything around it, so that like the totality is actually there in each one of these things. But there's this sort of like, you get this phenomenon happening where when things are kind of split up, each thing might be speaking to one particular perspective or one particular facet of what's going on, and you're not getting the complete picture, but you kind of have to piece together all these different separate things to sort of like and listen to all of them and try to combine them back together or something like that to get more of a singular unified truth. But then it can also just seem like maybe a bit of a chaotic mess, where it's not, as you're kind of the singular unifying truth gets lost, and you've got this kind of cacophony of contrasting, contradicting opinions and beliefs and stuff like that. One of the things that, like, the point that I was kind of like initially trying to get to with this idea was that as astrologers, it can be difficult to do astrology because each of us are having our own personal, individual, subjective experience, where when this is informed by a number of things. I mean, for example, like your own birth chart, right? Like, I am a guy who's got a Sagittarius stellium and a Scorpio stellium, and I think that I don't know if it comes across or not, but that my own style in approaching these things is probably to some degree informed by my astrological chart. And the other astrologers that I would follow or that I would like whether or not, they could be talking about this idea that like the actual aim of astrology is not to identify with your chart. You're not supposed to say that I am a Sagittarius and therefore I'm having a hard time with all this Gemini stuff on the opposite end, and I'd really like it if there is more things that were supportive of Sag right now, rather than having these big eclipses or whatever, right? Like, that you're supposed to be able to step back from your own subjectivity, get yourself out of the way, basically, right? Like, the point isn't to be approaching astrology from the point of view of your own biases and your own, like, I like this thing about a big universal truth because I'm a Sagittarius and that's my side, and I don't like this, multiplicity of all this Gemini stuff. I'd rather, but that's kind of the challenge, because our own charts create these kinds of biases, and we're I think what I kind of notice is that there's all these different astrologers, and that each of them has a very unique style that is bringing something unique to the table. But it's like what I was saying about like the mirror ball in a way, that rather than getting the clear point of view from one person, what you're getting is things split up and divided, where one person's talking more about this and one person's talking more about that, and you kind of have to piece them together to get the whole picture. You're not just getting the whole thing from one person. And what creates that is the sense of our separateness, our individuality, how we're all different, how we're all looking at things from different points of views, how, I like Hellenistic astrology, and then somebody else likes evolutionary astrology, and that, we might make a post, about the same transit, but it might sound completely different because the actual objective truth is kind of getting lost in all this subjectivity. And there's even like a philosophical problem in all this too, which is like, whether there's so many different dialects of astrology that, like especially with Vedic, if or Jyotish or whatever, you could be using a system where the entire zodiac is different because of a sidereal system versus a tropical system. And it's like, do we have any hope at all in finding some objective meaning, or are we just playing around with our subjectivity in all this, right? But that's one thing that's coming up for me with Mercury in Gemini. It's like the challenge of getting over your own subjectivity, putting yourself out of the way, like this is the thing, is like, you could have, as an astrologer, you could have a really bad day with something, right? And what your emotions are triggered, your mind is trying to problem solve this thing that's happening, and it's really distracting from actually doing a good job of clear, objective astrological reporting, right? Because you're not really paying it. You could be like, oh, this is, this, what is happening to me is indicative of the transits. And then what you could do is you could go and take that and put and like make that your this is what's going on today. Like everybody's good. This is a day where everyone's going to be mean to you, and you just have to do self-care. and but it's it's basically turning your own like personal diary entry into like, this is what's happening in the universe. It's not just about me. It's this big archetypal thing, but it's like, I think that's what you have to be careful for, is like, are you taking something that's personal and then projecting that onto the whole, global condition, like the whole, everybody in the world is having my experience because I'm actually just too distracted by my own personality, by my own subjectivity, that I'm blinded by what the actual big message is. I'm caught in this little thing, right? And I think another thing too is that, like, when it comes to like the overarching philosophy behind the work, it's like, because each of us, you can see this in your own natal chart, right? Is that each of us may have a certain, let's just say, a lesson to learn what on Earth, right? And that kind of informs our own perspective. But I think sometimes it's a mistake if we mistake our own personal lesson, our own personal things that we're doing in this life, as some universal thing, and say that, like, I had to, it's like if I had to learn more responsibility or something like that, and then I create, my message is telling everybody else to be, you're not really telling everybody else to be responsible. You're having this conversation with yourself, and you're telling yourself to be responsible. And I'm just using that as an example. It could be anything, right? But I think this is sort of like the challenge, or something at least that I see in a very Gemini heavy period, where you've got Mercury in Gemini, and we're going to have eclipses happening in the Sagittarius and Gemini axis right now, or not right now, but we're in this area, right? We've had our first eclipses in the winter time. Now we're gonna have our summer eclipse season coming up. So yeah, this is, I'm feeling these themes coming up of this. Where are we getting blinded by our subjectivity right? And that could be something with this Gemini solar eclipse, because the light getting blocked out. Like, where are you really missing the big picture with the, the South Node in Sagittarius, and you're just getting completely blinded by your own personal experience, right? Um, there are some other things that I think would go with this as well, though. I mean, to sort of play the other side of it, there could be some positives with Gemini and Mercury. Um, like with the whole thing about polyphony and everybody's right and stuff like that. I think, it's like a reminder to sort of, that even if things feel like they're kind of split up, where everybody's kind of speaking from their own subjectivity, that everybody is sort of like, you're not getting this big picture answer. You're getting one person, this is my story, and this is my story, and this is my, rather than having some sort of universal truth. There's this idea that even if you listen to, like, you're not going to get the big universal truth if you don't know how to listen to the little truth. You know what I mean? Um, like, if I would think that, some people might be really picky about where they're getting their insights from, right? That some people might be like, I'm only going to look for like the most credible teacher, or the most credible, astrologer or divinator, or like all these people, they're just, I don't trust that guy, he's just a charlatan. I don't, like, this person's just trying to rip you off and steal your, like, that could be a very like Mercury and Gemini thing, right? The trickster coming out, or the person who's, maybe giving you part of the truth but holding something back, and you don't quite trust them, or something like this, right? But there's this idea. One of my favorite spiritual teachers was this guy Nisargadatta Maharaj, and one of the things he said about spiritual gurus, he was kind of funny because he was playing that role himself, but what he said is that, like, if you don't know how to really listen to the people around you, even if they just seem like ordinary, normal, everyday people who don't have any special insight or any big wisdom to offer, like, if you can't get a little bit of wisdom out of something that just seems really commonplace and ordinary, then you're not going to get any wisdom at all out of somebody who's supposed to be the big guru who has all the insights and all the answers and stuff like that. And so I think one side of this whole thing with the North Node in Gemini and Mercury in Gemini is like being able to listen to the little voices, the multiple voices, the small truths, and that if you're good enough listener, you can get a bit of the big truth out of that, even if it may seem fractured and divided and maybe only a partial truth, right? Like, you can still an opportunity to listen, to get some insight, to see something, even if it's not like the big answer, right? I think, I don't know. There's some other sort of themes that I was thinking about this, like the with the kind of diversity of Gemini. Anyways, there could also be this quality of like being interested in many different varieties of areas, but you're not able to follow through on it at all, right? Whereas if you were to look at if you look at the tarot cards associated with Sagittarius, some of the cards are like the guy is like kind of beat up and he's wounded, but he's got the 9 wands behind them and he's kind of like protecting them, right? Or else the 10 of wands, the guy's got carrying the whole bundle over his back, and it's like this kind of heavy burden, but he's keeping going with it, right? Whereas if you contrast that to Gemini, Gemini is like the 10 of wands isn't the guy carrying it. It's like the guy being completely like he's got the 10 swords in his back, right? He's completely done with it. It's completely over. Um, so there's something about Gemini which is it's like like there could be many different many different voices, many different opinions, many different perspectives, but it's a little bit like ADHD, where you might listen to it for like, it would be like if you've got, like, let's say some different people sharing their videos online, right? Like this is already a 30-minute video, right? So it could be like you have a place where everybody comes and shares their material and shares their creation, right? But it's like, wow, it's so great that we've got a community, of such a rich community, with everybody offering all this different stuff. And or like it could be like artists or musicians who record albums, and wow, what a fantastic diversity. And then you go through the album, let's listen to each person's stuff, and you listen to like half a song. You get like, oh, that's a good, you listen to a minute of somebody's work, and then you're just like, oh, okay, like on to the next one. And it's like you're not even giving, you know what I mean? Like it's what kind of is it really valuable to have a diverse range of stuff if you're not giving quality attention to any of it? You know what I mean? Like if it just turns into this thing that's like junk food, right? That you're like, and I thought, I don't know. This could be my own Sagittarius bias coming through about why I'm not. There's something about the North Node in Gemini, anyways, that this is maybe my own subjectivity, that I feel more value in sort of this dedication, like dedicating your attention to one thing, right? Rather than having, it's like quality over quantity, basically. Rather than having a whole bunch of stuff that you don't actually appreciate, that you don't actually put the time and appreciation to, having one thing that you're really devoting your attention to. Because then, then you get this thing, because then it's like the dewdrops, right? Or the mirror ball. Like you could see this, you could look at a mirror ball having all these little fractured things, and it just, maybe you don't really see an image in it. It's just a color or a reflection or something. But if you were to zoom in just to one of those things and really pay attention to it, then you might actually see that it's a complete reflection of the whole thing. That it's actually all the wisdom, all the big picture is there. But the more we are just dividing our attention up in this sort of, and I think, social media is a good example of this, where it's like, if you're just, your attention is so divided, where it's just, you're getting these little, like, meme after little short video. It's like that you're getting all this stimulation, and it seems like there's a lot there, but at the end of the day, you're not getting anything from it. You know what I mean? And I think I don't know. This is a half an hour video. Before I close off, one other idea is that I talked about Ken Wilber had this perspective that everybody's right. That, like, no matter what background, whatever perspective, that everybody's at least got a little piece of truth to offer. You know what I mean? This may sound cynical, but the flip side of that could also be that everybody's wrong, which is that. If you want to know where I'm coming from with this, there's a line from the Tao Te Ching, or from Taoism, that the Tao which can be spoken is not the true eternal Tao. And so, if you look at all these people, let's talk about astrologers. If we're going to go, and I'm going to follow a whole bunch of astrologers, and I'm going to listen to each one of them, one side of it could be that each one of these people has a piece of the truth, and they're all having something to offer. But the inverse of that is each one of these people could be getting it wrong in their own way, right? And that what actually defines the quality of each person is not what they're offering, which is true, but where each person is messing it up in some way, and it's coming out distorted through their own subjectivity, through their own individuality, and that it might have just be better just to just be quiet about. But I mean, what there is the fun in that, right? Whereas, oh man, like, maybe I don't know, but I mean, it's a little bit hypocritical for me to say that when I'm trying to do it, when I'm trying to put out a video, right? But these are things that I'm kind of noticing, which is, the struggle with our subjectivity, basically, right? the struggle with our individuality and our diversity, and in a world with many different perspectives, with many different truths, rather than this one big truth. And there might be something appealing to that as well, because what I've also noticed is that there's something about, I don't like the thing about getting too dogmatic about stuff, where it's like there's one truth, and if you disagree with it, then out comes the Spanish Inquisition, and like there's the gospel, and then there's the heresy, and yeah, and then if somebody isn't speaking, if you're not completely in line with what the official sanctioned word of truth is, then you're excommunicated and exiled, and we keep it all pure, because like that in itself could be a bit of hubris, right? Because who really knows what, as being human beings, maybe we're kind of doomed to always be getting it wrong. Maybe if we're completely sure that we've got it right, then that if anything, that's a sign that we've just messed up, right? That we have to have some humility, basically, that we have to have humility in our own limitations of being, our ability to be a clear channel for this stuff, that inevitably we're going to distort it, we're going to color it in with our own subjectivity and our own human bias and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know, it's an interesting problem. To me, this is part of what makes the human experience interesting, and what makes it interesting to do this kind of work. So this is kind of maybe a little bit more of a philosophical video, but I thought I'd mention, this is just a take on it. I'm trying to find my own voice within the world of astrology. Try to offer something that I don't see other astrologers offering, so I'm not just regurgitating and repeating the messages of other people. I'm trying to this is my own kind of process of what I'm coming up with here.